welcome to The Book Was Better, where we're watching today's movies one book at a time. And for the third time this year, my review schedule is dictated by what's come out in theaters. A Wrinkle in Time is one of those older classics that schools are kind of obligated to teach nowadays, like Where the Red Fern Grows or To Kill a Mockingbird. The book was written by Madeleine L'Engle and published in 1962, but that was after getting 26 rejection letters. And apparently that's because the book had several unique elements that made publishers a little hesitant. It had a young female protagonist, aspects of it combined science and religion, and publishers were worried that the ideas would be too complex for a kid's book. And yet it went on to win the Newbery Medal for Children's Literature. L'Engle was researching quantum physics before she wrote the book, and her ideas carried through to the text. It's not that you need to have a PhD or a 12th level intellect to understand it, but some things, like the idea of time having a material presence, might be lost on younger audiences. Hell, I barely understand it and I'm brilliant. Eventually, Disney tried to make a movie out of the book, but they slated for a TV movie instead of a theatrical release. It won Best Feature Film in the Toronto Children's Film Festival, and that was about all the positive press it received. Most critics hated the movie, citing limp acting and clunky storytelling. Even the author hated it, stating, "I have glimpsed it. I expected it to be bad, and it is." As we'll see in the review, one of the biggest problems is in how little energy there is in almost every aspect of production. Basically, unless I stated otherwise, assume I was bored by whatever I'm talking about.
The human brain is composed of differentiated nerve tissues arranged in a series of structures with specialized functions.
Oh God, just stop! So how badly can they screw up this children's classic? Well, let's find out for ourselves as we test her through A Wrinkle in Time. That's not a real word. It is in the book! The movie opens with a bang as this star goes supernova.
Kaboom.
After the opening credits, we cut to Meg Murray, stargazing with her dad.
And whenever you need me, I'll be right here.
So naturally, the father isn't in the picture anymore.
Dad left us. No word, just left.
Which, I gotta say, is Disney showing restraint since he's just gone and not dead. Instead, that just leaves Meg with her mom, her 3 younger brothers, and the family dog.
Fort! Come on, Fort!
Hang on, did you name that dog Fart? Jeez, talk about blaming it on the dog. I kid, the dog's name is Fortinbras, but Meg and her family often call him Fort for short. Not that the movie ever calls him by his full name, or really uses him at all after this scene. Meg is played by Katie Stewart, and I'm not sure who's more at fault for her performance, her or the director.
I'm stupid.
Meg is presented as this languid little weed, harmless enough on her own, but you'd still rather have a vibrant flower instead.
I'm no good at hiding what I feel.
Well, you coulda fooled me! In the book, she stood out all the time, either because of her anger or her impatient nature. This all just sounds like someone cold reading the script after downing a bunch of tranquilizers.
My mom was weirdly confident that Dad would be back. I tried to believe her, but after a year, it gets hard. Hey, Mom.
Then again, almost all the characters come off as incredibly bored.
That's Neurons, and I'll be taking out points for misspelling.
When you unintentionally make Ben Stein look youthful and full of life, you done fucked up!
And then there's Charles Wallace.
Charles is Meg's youngest brother, played by David Dorfman, who you may remember as Aiden from The Ring.
She never sleeps.
Charles is harmless enough, giving yet another listless performance, but where Dorfman's unenthusiastic voice carried well in The Ring, it doesn't work so well here. Charles is a gifted student who we later discover is also psychic.
Charles Wallace, what about you? I'm sure you could tell us if you wanted to. No?
He's quiet around anyone that isn't in his family, but I read him as being much more lively when he did talk, something which Dorfman has trouble with.
I like him, Meg. I can read his thoughts, like yours and Mom's.
Then again, the thing that really annoyed me about him was that everyone calls him Charles Wallace.
Charles Wallace? Charles Wallace.
Charles Wallace.
Charles Wallace?
Charles Wallace. I know this is a petty complaint, but it sounds like everyone is calling him by a full name instead of just Charles. This wouldn't be so bad, except that if you took a shot every time someone said his name, you'd be dead by the intermission. Meg and Charles Wallace go to the same school, where they're surrounded by students who deserve to get tossed into a wood chipper.
Where's your daddy? I heard he was embarrassed. He had a kid who was 6 and can't talk yet.
Okay, turn it off. Turn it off. It didn't work. It did not work.
And it's in fighting some of those assholes that we meet Calvin, the third in our trio of kids.
You are such a loser, Eric. I don't want to hear it. Go home and grow up.
Calvin is played by Gregory Smith, who has the most life in his performance out of the three. But that means very little when he's not given any chances to really stand out. He's just kind of there. One thing of note that was updated from the book was his speech. In the book, he often called Charles old sport and said things like golly day when he was surprised. It wasn't bad, and updating his vocabulary worked since this movie clearly isn't set in the 1960s. It was just kind of weird because every time Calvin spoke, I imagined him as being this prim and proper British guy.
I say, Charles Wallace, what say you and I give those camisoles what for, eh?
So Meg wakes up one night and sees Charles Wallace making a sandwich that he's been playing with for several minutes. And this is where they meet Mrs. Whatsit.
Mrs. Who?
Who's on first? What's on second? I don't know's on third.
No, that's the other one.
Who's what? Yes.
What?
What's the guy's name on second base?
No, what's it?
What's it?
What is the fella's name on second base? I'm not asking you who's on second. Who's on first?
I just told you.
I don't know. He's on third. We're not talking about him.
Who is Mrs. Whatsit?
Who is on? I'll break your arm. You say who's on first?
Mrs. Watson.
Good to see you, Charles Wallace.
And this is Mrs. Whatsit, played by Alfre Woodard, breathing some much-needed life into this movie. Hands down, she is the best character here, if only because she's not boring. And she reflects her character from the book well, dressed and behaving oddly because she isn't actually human. Remember that supernova from the beginning?
Kaboom.
Well, that was actually her, as a star, before converting into a being of pure energy and consciousness. Somehow. I don't know, I don't actually understand quantum mechanics, so I'm just gonna call it space magic. Mrs. Whatsit only stopped by to see the family, to raid their fridge, and to give a mysterious hint.
And remember, Dana, there is such a thing in the real world as a tesseract.
Just don't let Loki near it. Meg is curious to find out what a tesseract is, so she and Charles wander off to an abandoned house to see Mrs. Whatsit.
Meg.
Yeah, hang on.
Last night you were talking about a tesseract. Meg.
Yeah?
Well, that's not Mrs. Watson.
Well, what is it then?
It's a crook.
Oh.
They then have to run home before their mom notices they're missing, making the entire scene completely pointless. Calvin comes over because he was compelled to by the voices in his head, just go with it, and Charles shows him some old video footage of the missing Dr. Murray.
And for some reason, the movie decides to just slow down. Did the editor hit the wrong button and just hope that no one would notice?
But the TV goes to static and starts talking, again, just go with it, and it's Mrs. Whatsit telling the kids to run outside. She meets them out in the forest, then things get really weird.
My dears, hold on to who you are first and alone, and this is very important. Hold on to each other.
Why?
It will keep you undamaged.
Undamaged?
And alive.
Alive?
Then Mrs. Whatsit wiggles her nose and turns into this thing. The kids blast off into space, sort of, as time and space are bent around them. And although the visuals have not aged well, I do like what the movie tries to do here. It's appropriately weird while not being so abstract that you haven't the slightest idea what's going on. They end up on a different planet, similar to Earth, and they meet Mrs. Who and Mrs. Witch.
Oh, that's a shortstop.
Wait, if they all go by Mrs., then who are they married to?
We are such stuff as dreams are made of. Shakespeare, The Tempest.
Mrs. Who appropriately quotes various lines to convey how she feels, like the book, but I'm a little disappointed by Mrs. Witch.
Get rid of them. At once.
It's a small detail, but in the book, her dialogue often repeated letters, like her voice was echoing, which gave her the image of existing in flux. Kinda like how the Flash did when he fought Brainiac Luthor.
I feel kinda funny.
Flash!
What we get isn't bad, and Kate Nelligan gives a decent performance, but Mrs. Witch doesn't have the booming presence that she did in the book.
It has all been mismanaged.
Mrs. Whatsit gives the kids some insight into what a tesseract is.
It's a wrinkle in time.
But they need to get moving, and that means watching Mrs. Whatsit transform into... I guess this monstrosity is fair enough as far as interpretation goes to the book, but my god is it hard to look at. Also, there's a Pegasus on the cover of the DVD case, and the kids never ride anything other than this, so what the hell? Where did the Pegasus come from? It's almost like they're trying to hide a hideous abomination. Later that night, the Space Magic trio talks about what to do, while Meg and Calvin stress over their situation.
Jeez, Calvin, I feel like I'm being held hostage in some wacko's dream.
Oh, well. There's no one I'd rather be held hostage with.
That was about as smooth as a bowl of sand. The romance element is really tacked on and totally out of nowhere. Meg and Calvin have had no real conversations together and don't have any chemistry. It was the same in the book, and just like the book, this subplot gets dropped almost immediately. This might lead to something later on in the series, but at this moment in the story, it's really unnecessary. After much deliberation, the ladies decide to take Meg and Calvin to see the Happy Medium, who lives inside a cave full of glowworms.
They feed off laughter.
In that case, don't let him watch Sarah Silverman. The Happy Medium is an odd fellow who spends his/her days watching a crystal ball and belting out the most unconvincing laughter you've ever heard.
What? What's with all the long faces? Look at the moping. Oh, your face is so long I can pole vault with it. What did you have for breakfast? A big bowl of misery flakes with misery milk?
People like this are probably why Amy Schumer still has a career. Well, visiting the Happy Medium pushed the kids into action, and so they're sent to Camazotz, a dark planet where the darkness has taken over and darkened everyone's hearts. This is the same obvious good versus evil nomenclature that we had in The Dark is Rising. See, when J.K. Rowling gave us a good versus evil plot, she at least included Magic Hitler. The kids land in a desert and almost immediately trigger a worm sign. The kids escape danger and make their way into town. Along the way, they see two kids playing, one jumping rope and another dribbling a basketball, both following a similar rhythm. When the book introduced this, there were multiple kids, and the repetition made everyone look like they were brainwashed or in a cult at first. The kids were out in the driveways because it was the designated playtime.
Why are you playing now?
It's the hour to play.
Everything was down to so strict a schedule that it could only really be performed by robots. Even all the cars parked in the driveways at the same time. This schedule is so strict that when one kid decides to dribble out of rhythm, he gets abducted by the state.
To the car, please. Just the boy.
But the movie's real crime in this scene is the terrible use of green screen and perspective. Nothing looks real, and even though this movie seems to be going for a sense of displacement, it looks more like the cameraman has no idea what the hell he's doing. The kids wander deeper into town, where they come across a theater playing all sorts of remakes with the word "it" in the title. Okay, I'll give you Loving It, but Casablanca It? Come on, you're not even trying at that point. Apparently, It is the big entity that runs everything on the planet and has everyone following this ridiculous schedule.
If it finds out, you'll be in trouble.
Which one? Tim Curry or Bill Skarsgård? But this scene does reveal where the main layer of It is, called Central Intelligence.
Whoa, that looks pretty central.
Inside the CCI, we see a bureaucrat's paradise, with everything adorned in a dull gray, all actions mandated by standard forms, and even one guy issuing commands from a Rolodex.
B-19.
The kids infiltrate deep into one of the hallways, discovering a tunneled maze underground. Charles Wallace says he can sense where his father is, but a group of guards are hot on their trail.
This is stupid, they're gonna see us.
Look, I know I'm not supposed to do this, but stay here. Be right back.
No, we're not supposed to split up, we have to stay.
Calvin's able to distract the guards for a few minutes, but winds up getting captured. And they start to brainwash him. This is an interesting development, though it's one that didn't happen in the book. There, the kids went straight to the end boss and confronted him. Here, though, we get to see how people get forcefully converted to its side if they're not willing to go along peacefully. So this move does fill out the universe a bit more, and more importantly, we get to find out what happened to Basketball Boy.
Stubborn, aren't you?
Oh no, that poor youth. Eventually, Meg and Charles Wallace find Calvin and rescue him, surprisingly easily actually, and they follow Charles' sixth sense to a small room, where they get trapped.
No!
But not to worry, because their father is being held in that room through a space-locked dimension where all the atoms are just different or something. I don't know, just space magic. But being so close yet so far to her father puts Meg on edge.
No, we need you! Daddy!
Calm down, think. What would Mrs. What's-It do?
Grab a bunch of kids and have them do the job for her? Actually, Meg takes out the glasses Mrs. Who gave her for the trip and is able to slip through the barrier to her father. Now, I should note that she never actually had to do this in the book, in part because Meg wore her own glasses. I guess they skipped that here because putting on 2 pairs of glasses would be ridiculous. Because then she'd look like someone out of Alcatraz's menagerie, and we can't have that. Something else that's worth noting is how Dr. Murray got here. The book explained that he was part of a top-secret government project that was studying the Tesseract. The experiment went wrong, as they often do, and he was flung across the galaxy. The movie decided, explaining that would take too much time, so they just plopped him here in this cell without further explanation. Because a 2-hour movie with 60 minutes of plot has only so much time for backstory.
You know all about the Tesseract, right?
Tesseract. God, I'm sorry.
Well, that doesn't matter. We have Mrs. Who's glasses.
Mrs. What?
No, who? Mrs. Who.
Third base!
Now, things have taken a slight turn from the book. In the book, they found the end boss first, known as the man with the red eyes, and he just let them go straight to the missing Dr. Murray. This was because he was so confident that he would be able to brainwash the entire group that he really didn't care what they did. Instead, the movie switches this up so that they rescue their father first and run into the man with red eyes afterwards.
Charles Wallace. At last! Oh, get away from him.
Oh, Jack! Oh, I'm so sorry.
Red Eyes is played by Kyle Secor, and he brings some much-needed energy onto the screen.
This is an amazing place, isn't it, Charles Wallace? What it has created here is a new order. All grief, all illness, all conflict, banished.
He seems like the devious, scheming sort in the book, very knowledgeable and able to play his targets for fools. This facet of his personality comes through easily in Secor's performance, but they changed his plot to get Charles to join him.
I'm gonna make you let Daddy leave. I'm gonna figure out what you are. Make you not be it anymore.
In the book, Charles decides the same thing, that he felt compelled to discover who Red Eyes really was, but that meant simply giving into the brainwashing. No resistance or anything. Here, they kind of do the same thing, but they start with a few games first.
I know what you're doing. I'm not gonna let you win me over with a few magic tricks. Sure.
The book makes Charles look foolhardy, while the movie makes him look like an idiot kid. Charles is brought completely under Red Eyes and its influence. At this part in the book, the group, including Dr. Murray, were brought to a domed building for conversion. This is where they got to see it in its pure form, which was just a pulsing brain. The pulse had a certain rhythm to it, which matched what the people in town followed, which showed their devotion to it. In the book, it was an average-sized brain, but in the movie, it's this massive thing living under the floorboards. But that's good! It means we can defeat him with the assholes living above your apartment! Dr. Murray puts Mrs. Who's glasses on and they jump out of there. But Meg gets separated, somehow getting injured when they land on a snow planet inhabited by strange, hairy creatures. I'm pretty sure this is why Wookiees aren't allowed to marry their cousins.
No. Don't fear, Calvin. You have landed on Ixchel, a planet for healing and for understanding. Hello to you.
Did she say they landed on planet Eggshell? So Chewbacca's bastard children, led by a creature called Aunt Beast, shelter the humans and take excellent care of them. Meg is understandably worried about her brother and feels exasperated. Meg spends her time sulking and worrying about her brother until Mrs. Witch tells her exactly what the problem is. God damn it, what the hell? I'm sorry, but the puns were getting worse by the second. I had to.
His powers are only beginning to...
What powers?
You've witnessed the earliest manifestations of them yourself.
You mean that, like, he's incredibly smart? And telepathic? Big deal.
Yeah, it is kind of a big deal. Your brother's basically a superhero. What if Clark Kent had a sibling?
Oh, Kyle, honey, why can't you be more like your brother Clark? He's so super.
Why? Because he can bench press a city and survive an atom bomb to the face? Big deal. Meg is eventually convinced to go back to Camazotz to save Charles Wallace, but she has to do it alone. Her dad's leg is broken, Aunt Beast can't leave her planet, and Calvin...
Send me back there. I'll grab Charles Wallace and...
This is not your job, Calvin.
Wait, that's it? That's a horrible reason not to send him! The guy's an athlete and is a lot better to send than nothing.
So if you three can't, and it's not Calvin's job, and Daddy's injured, then who's going back for Charles Wallace?
You prattling twit! Is the Star Lady trio sure they want to send Meg in alone for this? Their star player is a bitter teenager brimming with angst and self-loathing.
That's your problem, you know. No one loves you. You're too stupid. You're too ugly. You're too weird. You're too mean.
But eventually, Meg is tested away to Camazotz once again. Red Eyes and Charles are waiting for her, confident that she doesn't stand a chance.
Your overconfidence is your weakness.
Your faith in your friends is yours.
Does anyone else find it weird how well that fits? Meg's final battle with these two isn't a battle per se, more like an extremely drawn-out conversation in which neither side is willing to listen to the other. So, yeah, Meg is basically arguing online. The battle is really just Red Eyes trying to get into Meg's mind and convince her that his way is better. This leads to Red Eyes summoning an image of Calvin, which doesn't fool Meg.
You're not really here, I'm sure of it.
He's not?
No.
And just like that, Charles instantly snaps out of his brainwashing, and the two of them test her home safe and sound. And if that doesn't satisfy you at all, then avoid the book. The movie has made tons of mistakes so far, but the one area it easily beats the book in is the ending, if only because it understands story formula better. See, the movie gives us a drawn-out climax, but it is a climax. In the book, Meg walks in, sees her brother, tells him she loves him a dozen times, then they warp back home where Calvin and their parents are waiting for them. The climax and the resolution combined only last 6 pages. It's like Langle got bored and then just did a sloppy rush job to wrap everything up. In the book, we see Meg walking up to Central Intelligence, psyching herself up, and literally 4 pages later, she's back home. This ending was so abrupt that I thought I skipped an entire chapter. That nearly ruined what was otherwise a good reading experience. Talk about coming in for a crash landing. But the movie continues from there. We get another overly long scene of Meg and Charles Wallace reuniting with their family, until Meg makes note of one minor inconsistency.
I thought you hated pineapple.
What?
It's a good thing kids grow out of food fetishes.
Meg escapes the illusion, but Red Eyes keeps going on and on about how feeble Meg's attempts are, how inevitable her defeat is.
How the world will soon be his, yada yada.
It's a pacing problem that really comes out in the second half of the movie. Red Eyes spends forever converting Charles Wallace, and now they're taking forever to wrap up this climax. It could have been engaging character development, but since no one is putting any effort into their performances, nothing grabs your attention. Red Eyes draws upon Meg's insecurities and uses previous scenes from the movie to confuse her, but Meg's impatience wins out.
That's it. Like and equal are not the same thing. And I'll never give in to you.
Red Eye's own impatience gets the better of him, and he decides to just force Meg to convert the same way he forced Basketball Boy. Took him long enough. But then Meg discovers its one fatal weakness.
I love you so much.
That's the power of love. That's the power of love.
So yeah, Meg just says that she loves Charles Wallace enough times that it gives it an aneurysm. Apparently it comes from Omicron Persei 8.
This concept of love confuses and infuriates us!
Apparently this is enough to destroy its entire operation as the roof shatters and the whole place loses power. Good thing this doesn't follow Metroid logic, otherwise killing Mother Brain would destroy the whole planet. The Murray siblings walk around the victims of its bureaucracy and assure them that everything is alright.
You can't give up. You can't give in. Like and equal are not the same thing.
I guess that line was so epic that it had to be repeated.
You have to find your own beat.
And what better way to show that everything is alright than having Basketball Boy dribble his way to freedom? With it defeated and Camazotz freed, the kids and Dr. Murray are tessered back home by the Mrs. Ladies. And everyone lived happily ever after until a loud alarm went off in the theater to wake the audience up. I think this entire movie can be summed up with one particular line from MST3K.
They just didn't care.
I've seen plenty of boring movies for this show, but I am appalled at how little energy anyone put into this one. Only 2 people put in a real effort into the roles, those being Alfre Woodard and Kyle Secker, but everyone else, in both cast and crew, just couldn't be bothered. The pacing is an awful mess, scenes drag on forever, and most of the sets look like they belong in a high school play. I guess some of the special effects weren't awful for the time, but they really haven't aged well. The whole experience was incredibly tedious. And oh gods, that weeping angel horse is gonna haunt my nightmares. Oh, and the remake? That one's gonna have its day too. The movie gets a 1 out of 5. I was first introduced to the book back in elementary school, but couldn't appreciate how good it was back then. Looking at it now, there are a few problems, but it's a much smarter book than I gave it credit for. A lot of the ideas are fascinating, like folding space and time, and at one point the kids briefly visit a planet that only existed in the second dimension. The plot is a fairly simple one, and things are made easier for child protagonists, but we can give that a pass since it's a kid's book. After all, one doesn't read See Spot Run for its narrative complexity. However, there are several drawbacks, like some pacing issues, though nothing like what the movie had, and abundance of exposition and Charles Wallace's name. I'm sorry, it just bugs me. And that ending was so bad that by itself, it knocked the whole point off the final score. If I get to a climax of a book and have to wonder if most of the pages are missing, the author probably screwed up. In the end, the book gets a 3 out of 5. The movie fares a little better when considering just the bare facts of the book. Yeah, all the essential scenes are there, and that ending was patched up as well, so points for that. However, we're just talking about the skeletal plot, not how it was presented. Like I said before, the movie has no energy, so it moves along with none of the excitement or character of the book. It feels like almost no one wants to be here, so while the movie got the plot down right, it has none of the spirit. As an adaptation, A Wrinkle in Time gets a 2 out of 5.